I'm Morgan, 32. I hadn't been home in 7 years. They seated me near the kitchen, far from the toasts, the laughter, and the table where my name was always absent. Claire smirked. Derek scoffed. My mother barely brushed my cheek. They called me lost. A drifter. A nobody. Then the waiter leaned in, eyes steady, and said, "Agent Morgan. It's an honor." Forks froze midair. And for the first time in years, they looked at me, really looked. Not as the disappointment, but as the threat they never saw coming. I hadn't been home in 7 years. 7 birthdays, 7 holidays, and 7 years of silence, long enough to stretch between my mother's calls and my father's avoidant nods. But tonight I returned, not because I was missed, but because guilt has a way of drafting invitations no one dares decline. The house looked the same. The ivy still curled around the Hawthorne Estates pillars like fingers refusing to let go of something long dead. Inside, lights spilled from antique sconces, mingling with soft jazz and the murmur of familiar voices. My mother, Evelyn, was turning 65. The entire family had gathered to celebrate her and tolerate each other. When I walked in, the air shifted. Not abruptly. Just enough to notice. Claire, my sister, was the first to break into a performative smile. "Morgan. Wow. We weren't sure you'd actually show." I offered a nod and an even smaller smile. "Surprise." Derek, her husband, stepped forward with a wine glass and a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We figured the nomadic soul finally got tired of wandering. Or maybe you're just in between soul-searching now." The laugh that followed wasn't cruel, it was worse. It was casual. Dismissive. My mother kissed the air near my cheek, not quite touching. Her perfume hadn't changed since I was a child. Sweet, expensive, suffocating. "You've gotten so lean," she observed, scanning my blazer like she was evaluating how much I could afford these days. "DC stress diet," I replied lightly. Richard, my father, nodded vaguely and said something about the rain. Nothing more. Nothing real. I was seated at the table closest to the kitchen, next to the hallway door, a polite exile. "We figured you'd prefer the quiet," Evelyn said, already turning to greet another guest. They laughed and toasted and applauded each other's success. Claire had won some local PTA leadership award. Derek landed a big client for his firm. The room glowed with warmth, the kind you feel when you're on the outside of a bonfire watching everyone else warm their hands while you shiver just far enough away to pretend you're fine. No one asked what I'd been doing these past years, not really. Just vague questions like "still in consulting" and "didn't you used to work in finance?" I nodded. "I advise select individuals." Derek didn't miss a beat. "Crisis counseling for yourself, I assume." I laughed softly without humor. When I tried to speak, someone always cut me off. My mother pivoted to a conversation about Claire's new kitchen remodel. My niece Lila's name came up, the only person in that house who ran to hug me without hesitation when I walked in. 11 years old and already more genuine than the adults raising her. From across the table, a young man, a server, moved through the room with quiet precision. He looked at me longer than most. Not in judgment, but recognition. Our eyes met. He dipped his head subtly. His name tag read Eli. He returned with wine, offering me a glass with a thin crack in the rim. "Hope you don't mind," Derek said beside him. "Didn't think it'd be an issue." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Another guest, odd, we were already over capacity for Evelyn's preferred crowd. The front door opened. A young man in a stiff black suit walked in, carrying himself like he didn't quite know the rules here. His eyes scanned the room and then locked on mine. He froze. The music kept playing. Conversations hummed. Then he stepped forward and said clearly and audibly, "Ma'am. Federal agent. I read your dossier at Quantico. It's an honor." The room stilled. Forks paused midair. My hand trembled just enough for the wine to catch the light and reflect back a version of me I no longer recognized. Claire blinked. Evelyn's hand tightened around her wine glass. Derek let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Wait, what did he say?" I didn't answer. Eli, still standing nearby, stepped slightly back, his posture straightening. He hadn't planned to reveal me. But now, with the truth out, he didn't shrink from it. I set my glass down. Nobody moved. For a few seconds, the only sound was the soft clink of a spoon against a plate from the far corner of the room, someone who hadn't processed what had just happened. And in that silence, something shifted. All the years I had spent being the quiet one, the invisible daughter, the one they whispered about but never asked directly, it all condensed into that one moment. That one title, Agent. Suddenly, my absence wasn't a mystery. It was a weight. One they had tried to ignore until someone else held it up in the light. I looked around the table, seeing their faces through new eyes. Not angry, not triumphant, just clear. For the first time in years, I felt seen. And it wasn't because I shouted. It was because someone else had spoken what I refused to. Agent Morgan. Yes, that was me. Sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do is disappear. For everyone's safety but her own. They say silence is peaceful. But not all silence is chosen. That night after Eli spoke my name aloud, my real name, I went numb. Not from fear but from memory. It's funny how the mind doesn't drift, it detonates. One word, one recognition, and suddenly I was no longer in a dining room full of people who didn't believe in me. I was back in another kind of room, low light, sweat-soaked uniforms, and the rustle of foreign voices behind concrete walls. Back in the field. Back before everything fell apart. Before the government made me invisible. Before they took my voice and told me to call it protection. I joined the agency at 24. Top 5 in my class at Quantico. Fast-tracked into fieldwork because I didn't flinch, because I spoke 6 languages and trusted nobody. Because I was exactly what they needed, sharp, silent, and willing to disappear when asked. My first deployment wasn't glamorous, it was gritty. Balkan smuggling routes, backroom meetings in neon-lit cafes, breathing in the kind of fear that lives in your throat. That's where I met Ethan. Ethan Cole was everything I wasn't. Loud, sarcastic, charming in a way that made people underestimate his IQ. We were partnered not because we clicked but because we didn't, and sometimes that's exactly what you need to survive. He cracked doors with a smile. I secured the exits. He joked. I calculated. He made people talk. I made sure they never forgot what they said. Over the years, we built a rhythm. One that held through chaos, raids, failed intel drops, and backstabs from friendly sources. He had a habit of calling me Red, not because of my hair, but because, as he put it, you're the final warning light before things blow to hell. But I wasn't there when he died. Not really. And that's the kind of thing that keeps you up even when the nightmares forget your name. The last op was in Istanbul. Operation Falcon Echo. It was supposed to be a clean extract. Get in, secure the drive, get out. The data we were after, names, bank routes, black ledger deals, it was the kind of thing governments go to war over. Ethan knew that. We both did. We were ambushed halfway to the safe house, they'd been tipped. Maybe by someone inside. Maybe not. I still don't know. What I do know is Ethan shoved the encrypted drive into my vest and shouted, "Run." I didn't want to. God, I didn't want to. I saw the wound. His side bleeding out fast. But he didn't even look scared. He looked, sure, like he'd made peace with this. Go Red. If you stay, we both die. Make it count. So I ran. I memorized the screams. The blast. The way the night sky over Istanbul flickered red like it was mourning him with me. I delivered the drive. I saved the data. And they buried him. And then they buried me. I wasn't allowed at his funeral. Security concerns, they said. My clearance was frozen. My apartment was swept twice. I got a memo, cold electronic, no signature, informing me that due to the sensitivity of your recent deployment, continued operational participation is no longer feasible. I'd become a liability. Not because I failed, but because I didn't die. I had seen too much, known too many names, held too many secrets. I wasn't an agent anymore. I was a file to be sealed. A risk to be managed. They offered a compensated exit plan. I didn't take it. I walked away. But when you've lived so long in shadows, you don't step into the light. You vanish between both just enough to keep breathing. That's what I did, until my name was spoken again by a young man carrying a tray of wine. Until tonight. Back in the present, I stood on the terrace alone, letting the cold bite through my suit. I didn't mind, the chill grounded me. Inside, laughter echoed. Derek was probably retelling some story that made him look better. Claire was likely soaking in the admiration of being the one who stayed. Evelyn would be polishing her image as the elegant matriarch. Richard. I wasn't sure he even knew where he stood anymore. None of them had asked me what I had lived through. None of them knew I'd held dying men in my arms. That I'd walked through bombed-out buildings and whispered lies to arms dealers so my team could live another day. That I'd watched a child bleed out because I couldn't get to him in time. That I'd killed. More than once. They just thought I'd gotten tired of ambition. That I'd floated through DC without purpose. That I was the wandering disappointment. Funny how the people who claim to know you are always the first to erase your edges when you don't fit their picture frame. But I let them. Because it was easier than breaking the silence. Because if I told them the truth, they'd never sleep again. The door opened softly behind me. It was Eli. He stood at a respectful distance, eyes forward. I didn't mean to say it out loud, he said quietly. But I meant every word. I nodded. You were at Quantico class of 2019. We read your mission files, redacted mostly, but your name came up. Often. Did they tell you what happened to me? He shook his head. Only what you did. I looked at him, and for a fleeting moment I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time, respect that didn't come with a question mark. Maybe the world had moved on without me. But maybe that wasn't the end of the story. Maybe it was the start of telling it. It wasn't the silence that frightened me, it was who had learned to hide inside it. The first time I noticed him, he was adjusting his cufflink, nothing dramatic, just a subtle twist of the wrist beneath the cuff of a finely cut charcoal suit. To anyone else, he looked like a last-minute addition to the guest list. Maybe someone from Derek's firm. Maybe an old college friend of Claire's with too much cologne and not enough charm. But to me, that twitch of muscle, the calculated stillness in his eyes, I knew that stillness. I had trained to read it. I had tracked men who wore it like second skin. I'd seen it on the most dangerous faces in the world, and I had seen it once before on a man the agency had declared dead. Victor Lane. I didn't recognize his new face entirely, but the way he scanned the room, methodical, not curious. The way his hand hovered just a second too long over the napkin holder, as if assessing its weight, the deliberate stiffness in his posture that said, "Don't engage," instead of, "I'm nervous." It all hit at once. Victor had died during a transfer riot outside Cluj-Napoca. That's what the debrief said. Burned beyond recognition. End of file. I had attended the follow-up analysis virtually. There were no remains, no fingerprints, no definitive proof, just a scorched van and some vague satellite footage. I had believed it. Maybe because I needed to. But the man by the fireplace tonight. He wasn't a memory. He was breathing. Watching. Waiting. I felt Eli's presence before I saw him. He moved like someone trained not to disrupt shadows. He slid beside me again this time, placing down a folded linen napkin as if he were simply tending to my place setting. "They told us about you," he murmured. I didn't look at him. "Who? Quantico? Class of 2019. You were a case study in our ethics module." I raised an eyebrow slightly. "Ethics? You broke every protocol. Saved 6 agents. Got sanctioned for the rest. That sounds about right." "They called it iron fog," he said quietly. "Most of the files were sealed. But your name wasn't. Not to us." I let out a soft breath. "What else did they say? That you saw the truth and paid for it?" I looked at him then. He was young, but not naive. There was a steadiness in him that reminded me of the first time I held a weapon, not afraid to use it, just terrified of what it would change about me. I followed his gaze subtly across the room. Victor was now chatting with Evelyn. Smiling. A glass of champagne in hand. That smile didn't touch his eyes. Nothing ever did. Claire had introduced them. She stood beside them, beaming, one hand resting lightly on Victor's arm, too casual to be polite, too intimate to be meaningless. My pulse tightened. He wasn't here by accident. The mood in the dining room had shifted. It wasn't the obvious kind of tension. Not yet. But the laughter had gone a little quieter. The glances lingered longer. Like someone had whispered something into the air, and now everyone was pretending they hadn't heard it. Eli had disappeared again, moving through the room like an afterthought. I stood to refill my glass, walking slowly past the edge of the table toward the wine cart Derek had been showing off earlier. He called it a conversation piece, though it looked like it had more secrets than he did. As I passed, I could feel it, the eyes. Not just Victor's. Others. The kind of attention that isn't admiration. It's analysis. People trying to rearrange what they thought they knew, like puzzle pieces suddenly not fitting the way they used to. That server had said Agent Morgan. He hadn't whispered it. And once a word like that is said out loud in a place like this, it never really leaves the room. It just echoes quieter and deeper until even the walls lean in to listen. I set down my empty glass and walked toward the hallway, stepping outside again for air. But I wasn't running. Not this time. From the corner of my eye, I caught Victor watching me through the reflection in the glass. He didn't flinch when I turned slightly, didn't look away. He wanted to be seen. That's what chilled me. Predators don't always hunt from the shadows. Some of them walk straight into the light, knowing no one expects the monster to smile during dinner. My fingers brushed the pendant at my neck, the locket that still held the remnants of the Phoenix Protocol. I thought I'd buried that part of my life, soldered it shut with grief and silence. But you can't kill a fire that still has oxygen. Victor being here wasn't just a coincidence, it was a signal. Something was waking up. And I had just become visible again, not just to him but to everyone. Inside, Evelyn was raising her glass. Another toast. Another round of performative pride and polite applause. But their eyes, some of them, kept sliding toward me. A neighbor leaned toward my mother and whispered something. Evelyn's lips thinned. Claire was watching me now too, the corners of her smile stiff. She knew something was off, but she didn't know what. Derek made a joke about wine and war stories. No one laughed. Later, when Eli returned to collect the dessert plates, he leaned just a little closer. "He's not alone," he said. I didn't ask how he knew, I just nodded. Because I could feel it too. Something had changed in the air, like the storm was already in the house, and we were the ones pretending it hadn't started raining. They had called me a nobody. Now they were trying to remember who I really was. But one person in that room already knew. And he wasn't here to remember. He was here to finish what he'd started. I didn't need to raise my voice. The truth did it for me. The wine glass trembled in Evelyn's hand. Claire had gone pale, not with fear, but with the kind of disbelief that only comes from realizing the family's black sheep was never black at all. Just hidden under layers too inconvenient to acknowledge. Derek was the first to speak. Of course he was. He chuckled like someone had just told a wildly inappropriate joke at a funeral. "Wait. You're serious, you were." "What a real federal agent," I said nothing. He looked around, inviting everyone else into his performance. "I mean, come on. Am I the only one who thinks this sounds like a Netflix script? What's next? Secret tattoos and a kill count. I don't have to explain myself," I said quietly. He raised an eyebrow. "That's usually what people say when there's nothing to explain." Beside him, Claire's jaw clenched. "So all this time, all these years, we thought you were just flailing, drifting, and instead you were what? Living some double life." I didn't correct her. Because that wasn't the part that mattered. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice brittle. "Morgan, if you were involved in something dangerous, you should have told us. We could have what I asked, not unkindly. Supported you. Explained to people. Made them understand." She touched her pearls, a nervous reflex that told me more than her words ever could. "You didn't even try to understand," I replied. Richard cleared his throat. "If I'd known." "But you didn't want to know," I said, eyes on him now. "None of you did." Silence fell again, heavier than before. The kind of silence that wraps around your ankles and tries to pull you under. They weren't angry that I'd kept secrets. They were angry because I didn't fit the version of me they had created, the one that made them feel superior, stable, predictable. I looked around the table, slowly taking in each face. Their expressions weren't just shock, they were shame masquerading as disbelief. No one offered a kind word. No congratulations. No awe. Just awkward shifting in chairs and careful sips of wine. Because if I had been something more than what they assumed, then it meant they had been wrong, and that was unacceptable. Derek leaned back, crossing his arms. Honestly, I don't think anyone here really noticed you were gone. That one stung not because it was cruel, but because it was true. Claire folded her napkin with mechanical precision. This whole thing, it just feels performative. Like you came back to show off. I came back because it was Mom's birthday, I said. Evelyn nodded tightly, unsure if she wanted to believe me. Richard stared into his glass like it might offer a way out. And then Eli, brave, steady Eli, dropped the dessert tray. The crash echoed like thunder through the room. Everyone jumped. He bent to collect the scattered silverware, but instead of rushing away an apology, he straightened slowly and said, voice calm and clear, "Sorry, ma'am. I wasn't trained to serve a federal agent undercover in a public setting." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the music seemed to stop. Claire's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered. Evelyn gasped softly. Richard muttered something unintelligible under his breath. Derek stood halfway, mouth open. "What did you just say?" I stood too. No rush, no theatrics. "I hadn't planned on saying anything tonight," I said evenly. "But since a trainee let it slip, I'll clarify I'm no longer active. But I was a federal agent. For over a decade." A neighbor I didn't even know her name dropped her fork. Another guest whispered, "Oh my God." "I served in multiple international operations," I continued, "including Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. My work never made headlines. It wasn't meant to." Eli stepped back into the corner, spine straight. The room pulsed with stunned silence. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't defending. I was simply telling the truth. But the truth has a way of breaking glass, even when spoken softly. Derek finally let out a brittle laugh. "Right. Okay, and I'm a Navy SEAL. What's your next big reveal?" "You stopped an international arms trade with a butter knife." I didn't look at him. Instead, I looked at Claire. Her face had gone unreadable, but her hands trembled in her lap. She had always prided herself on being the one who followed the rules, who built a life around predictability. And now her younger sister, the disappointment, the nomad, the outlier, had just shattered the hierarchy she'd carefully maintained. Evelyn placed a hand over her chest, eyes wide. "Morgan, are you safe now?" That word again. Safe. I almost laughed, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "I was never safe." "Not really. But that's not the point." Claire finally snapped. "So what does you come in here, drop a bomb on all of us, and act like you're the victim?" "No," I said softly. "I'm just done hiding." What none of them understood, what they couldn't begin to grasp, was that I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I had spent years buried under layers of silence because it was safer for everyone. Not just me. They thought I disappeared because I couldn't make it. But the truth was, I disappeared because I couldn't risk dragging them into the line of fire. And now, even as they sat in disbelief, I wasn't angry. I was free. And that was enough. Sometimes the monster doesn't break in. Sometimes it's invited. The air hadn't moved in minutes. Conversations had gone silent, not politely, but nervously. Eyes darted, voices lowered, and forks hovered halfway between plates and mouths. They didn't know what to say. But I wasn't listening to them anymore. I was watching him. Victor Lane. He stood near the corner of the room, sipping from a crystal glass like he belonged here, like he hadn't once orchestrated a multi-million-dollar cyberweapons theft and left bodies in 4 countries to cover his trail. He looked comfortable. That scared me more than anything. My eyes trailed to his wrist. There it was. A flicker of red beneath the edge of his cuff. Barely noticeable. The thinnest pulse of light, subtle enough to look like a smartwatch notification. But I had seen it before, years ago, in a back alley in Bucharest during Operation Odessa. It was a covert signal used by ghost operatives to confirm backup had eyes on the perimeter. It meant he wasn't alone. It meant this dinner wasn't just an awkward family reunion. It was a setup. Eli brushed past again. He didn't speak this time, but I felt the shift in his movements, slower, tighter. His tray was a little too high, giving him a better angle on the crowd. He was scanning just like me. I followed Victor's gaze. It wasn't random. He wasn't mingling like a stranger. He was moving in deliberate arcs, pausing at specific points, making soft contact with certain guests, tapping the back of chairs, adjusting a flower vase. 3 o'clock, 5, 7. Corners. Sightlines. He was positioning something. Or someone. Then I saw it. Claire. She was watching him. Not in confusion, not in suspicion. With recognition. Not alarmed, just tense. Their eyes met for a second too long. Hers flicked away first. It was small. A micro-expression. But I had spent enough time in interrogation rooms to know the look of someone who's holding a secret with trembling fingers. Claire knew him. Maybe not the whole truth. Maybe not his name. But something about him wasn't foreign to her. I could see it in her shoulders, the way they tightened like a muscle bracing before impact. And I remembered something else. Earlier when Victor arrived, Claire had been the one to greet him. I thought you said this was invitation. Only she had laughed to Derek, playful but pointed. He had just smiled and said I pulled some strings. We need new energy at these things, don't we? Need new energy. Or need a plausible excuse. I crossed the room toward the drink cart not because I needed another glass, but because from there I could hear more. Derek was speaking with Victor now. Their voices low, but their stances familiar. Too familiar. This wasn't networking, this was negotiation. I sent the files last week, Derek murmured. Victor nodded. Encrypted. Of course. You think I'm an amateur? Victor's smile curled, polite but predatory. That depends, he said. My stomach turned cold. Files. Sent. Encrypted. What files? And why was my brother-in-law speaking in code with a man the agency had buried? I turned slightly, catching Claire at the edge of the room. Her eyes were on me now, not soft. Not sisterly. Guarded. As if she wasn't sure what I had already pieced together. And maybe she was right to wonder. Because I didn't know yet. But I would. I stepped outside again, phone in hand, pretending to scroll. But really I was checking signal interference. The app I still kept hidden, ghost-coded under a calendar widget, began a silent scan for anomalous transmissions within a 50-foot radius. 3 blips appeared instantly. One matched Victor. The other 2 weren't tagged. Unknown sources. Near the living room. Near the upstairs study. Both pulsing, both active. This wasn't a social call, it was a surveillance net. And it was already inside the house. I moved back inside, slowly letting the door click behind me like I didn't already feel the tension crawling down my spine. Claire stood by the dessert table now, pretending to laugh with 2 PTA friends. Victor passed behind her, lightly brushing her elbow. A signal, a threat, or just habit. Whatever it was, she flinched. That's when I knew. She was in over her head. She wasn't clean. But she wasn't fully in control either. Which meant Derek had dragged her into something. And Victor had taken it further. As I returned to the dining area, Eli stepped in with a coffee tray, whispering behind me as he passed. Check the study. Behind the bookshelf. Something's transmitting. My heart clenched, but my steps stayed even. Who's watching? I asked without turning. He didn't answer. But I could feel it. The watchers weren't just outside anymore. They were here, in our family home. I took one last look across the room. Derek clinking glasses, Victor scanning for exits. Claire wringing her hands in a way she hadn't since we were kids. And Evelyn. Still smiling like nothing had happened. Still pretending the world she curated wasn't falling apart at its silk-stitched seams. But I knew now. The enemy hadn't kicked down the door. He had walked in. Because someone from the inside had unlocked it. Last time I lost a partner. This time I won't lose the child. The party ended like all disasters do, quietly. There was no announcement, no dramatic final toast. Just the slow unraveling of smiles, guests offering stiff hugs, fake promises to catch up soon, and the clink of heels walking too fast toward the door. Victor had vanished half an hour earlier. Derek claimed he had gone to take a call. Claire avoided my eyes entirely. Evelyn was still clutching her pearls like a lifeline, and Richard, Well, he had always mastered the art of disappearing in plain sight. I was helping Eli stack dessert plates when I noticed it. No Lila. She had been glued to my side earlier, sneaking extra frosting, giggling when she stuck her finger into a truffle. But now, nothing. Have you seen Lila? I asked Claire as she picked up her purse. She blinked, startled. She was with Derek. Wasn't she? Derek looked up from his phone. She went upstairs. Probably fell asleep in the guest room. Did you check? I asked. He shrugged. She does that sometimes, but something in my gut twisted. That kind of twist you don't ignore. 10 minutes later, the entire house had been searched. Closets, bathrooms, garden, garage. No Lila. Her phone was off. Her school bag still hung on the coat rack. Her ballet flats were by the door. But she was gone. Claire's voice cracked first. Morgan, this isn't funny. If this is some kind of test, it's not, I said, already pulling out my encrypted device, the one no one was supposed to know I still carried. I logged into the emergency channel used for tracking minors linked to agency surveillance. It had been years since I used it. But once you're in the system, you're never really out. Lila's last location pinged 3 miles west, an industrial zone near Kingsley Complex. Nowhere near the road home. Nowhere near anything a child should be. I looked up at Derek, who was finally beginning to pale. This has something to do with you, I said quietly. I don't know what you're talking about. His voice faltered. I did. The phone buzzed in my hand. No contact. No subject line, just a video. I hit play. The screen lit up to a dimly lit room. Concrete walls. A single chair. Lila sat, her hands loosely bound with zip ties. Her legs swung slightly, scared but not screaming. Brave like her mother, maybe. Brave like the girl who had once said I was her favorite grown-up. My lungs froze. Then he stepped into frame. Victor. Taller than I remembered. Leaner. Same dead eyes. Hello again, Morgan, he said, voice smooth, accented cold. No demands, no threats. He crouched next to Lila. Last time you chose the mission over your partner. Let's see who you choose now. He smiled, then tapped the camera lens. The screen went black. No ransom. No instructions. Just the same chilling truth. This is personal. Claire was sobbing, now collapsed on the couch, Evelyn rocking beside her, murmuring meaningless reassurances. Richard stood stiffly by the window, pretending to think when it was obvious he had no idea what to do. I turned to Derek. You brought him here. He shook his head too fast. I didn't know you sent encrypted files. That was business investment material. You handed a known international operative an open door into our home. I didn't know who he was. But you didn't ask. And that was enough. I grabbed my go bag from the car. It was always there. Even when I swore I was done. Old habits die harder than ghosts. Inside were the same tools I hadn't touched in years. Thermal lenses, encrypted comms, a folding blade, the locket still around my neck. Inside that locket was more than memory. It held the last piece of a drive Ethan had died to protect. The same drive Victor had once tried to burn, and now he wanted leverage. As I loaded the location into my map, Eli appeared beside me. I'm coming. I looked at him. He didn't flinch. Why? Because you're not the only one who owes a child their safety. I didn't ask what that meant. Didn't need to. We moved in silence, 2 shadows slipping out of a house that had once been home and was now nothing but a crime scene with wallpaper. The Kingsley complex loomed ahead, broken glass teeth, rusted beams, the kind of place no one looked at twice. It had been condemned years ago. Too dangerous to demolish, too forgotten to guard. We parked 2 blocks out. No headlights. No chatter, just breath. Just instinct. As we approached the perimeter, Eli whispered, "You don't have to do this alone." I smiled tight and dry. I never planned to do it alone. That was the mistake I made with Ethan. We moved in from opposite sides, silent and sharp, but in the back of my mind his words echoed. Let's see who you choose now. This time the choice wasn't between Data and a partner. It was between the past and the only part of my family still untouched by betrayal. This time, I would not run. He thought he could haunt me with memory. He forgot I was made of it. The Kingsley Industrial Complex smelled like rusted metal and scorched pasts. It crouched at the edge of town, the kind of forgotten place people drove by without looking twice, too broken to fix, too cursed to touch. Eli and I circled the perimeter in silence. His steps were light, precise. He moved like someone with training, but, more than that, he moved like someone who had something to lose. "East Wing's dark," he whispered. "But the power grid's live. Someone's home." I nodded, scanning the side entrance with my thermal lens. One faint heat signature, stationary. Guard maybe. Or a camera tech. But the source was unmistakable. They wanted me to find them, and I would. We breached through a broken panel near the loading dock, slipping through the darkness like it belonged to us. Inside, the walls still held echoes of machines, of labor, of something deeper. But most of all, they held silence. The kind I knew intimately. As we moved deeper, the building transformed. It wasn't random clutter. It was curated, reconstructed, and then I saw it. The hallway, same width, same turns. Same flicker in the overhead lights. It was the interrogation wing from Bucharest. The one where Ethan bled out beside me. The one I'd never spoken about, not even in debriefs. Victor had rebuilt it. Every inch. I stopped outside the final room. The door slightly ajar. A soft hum pulsed from within, biometric monitoring. I pushed the door open. There she was. Lila. Alive. Eyes wide, not crying. Brave. She was strapped gently to a chair, not tightly, not cruelly. Just enough to keep her still. Her breathing came in quick spikes, and beside her a monitor traced each one. Victor wanted me to see it. To know she was afraid. And he was waiting for me. Standing by her side, dressed in charcoal gray, hands folded behind his back like he was welcoming an old friend. Or a mistake come home. "Agent Morgan," he said softly, almost like reverence. "Don't call me that." "But it's who you are," he replied. "Even when they stripped the title, you stayed the role. Always watching. Always sacrificing." He stepped forward slowly, not reaching for me, but for the screen behind him. It flickered. Then, it played. Ethan's face, wounded. Pale. Eyes locked onto the camera. His last moments. The footage was classified. Buried. No one should have had it. "Run," Ethan gasped. Then the flash. The room went dark. Except here now it didn't. It played on loop again and again. The second my world fell apart. Victor turned toward me, eyes unblinking. "You left him. He made me leave. You didn't drag him out. I tried. You chose the mission. I chose what he asked me to choose." Victor tilted his head. "Did you ever wonder why I survived Bucharest?" And he didn't. I didn't answer. Because I had. Every damn day. He pulled something from his pocket. A palm-sized device, sleek obsidian black. A portable decryption module. "The Phoenix Protocol," he said, tapping it. "Encrypted data, names, locations. State secrets your country doesn't even admit exist." My heart pounded. He knew, he always had. "I want the original," he said. "Not the redacted copy you tried to bury. The core data." My hand instinctively rose to the locket around my neck. He smiled. "I told you, you never stopped being the agent. You wear your secrets like armor." The locket hung there, small and unassuming. But on the back, etched in fine silver, was a symbol no one ever noticed. A phoenix. Wings outstretched, rising from flame. A reminder. A warning. A promise. He stepped closer slowly. "You give me the drive and the child walks away untouched. I want the truth, Morgan. Not filtered, not redacted, just raw." I clenched my fist. The microdrive inside the locket was the last unaltered copy of Phoenix. It held evidence that could unravel governments. It had cost lives. It had cost Ethan. And now it was the only thing between Lila and whatever Victor had planned next. He raised a brow. "Last time you chose the mission over the man. This time you get to choose again. Blood or data." His hand extended. Open. Waiting. My body tensed. Every cell screamed for action. But I couldn't move. Not yet. Because it wasn't just about Lila, it was about all of it. Ethan. The agency. The years they erased me. The truth they buried. And the fire still burning under my skin. Then from my earpiece, Eli's voice crackled. Roof access secure. Your move, Morgan. My fingers twitched over the locket. I looked at Victor. I never chose the mission, I said softly. I chose survival. He laughed. That's what we all say right before we sell our souls, but I wasn't selling mine tonight. Not again. I took a slow breath, steadying my pulse. Because a phoenix doesn't rise quietly. It burns everything down first. You didn't sell data, you sold me. Victor's hand hovered closer, still waiting. The locket, he said softly. Now. But something shifted. The air changed. Not around us, behind us. I felt it before I heard it. A presence. A breath. Then a voice. Not Victor's. Not Eli's. My father's. I already gave it to him. I turned so fast I almost lost balance. Standing in the threshold of the interrogation room, hands raised not in surrender but in justification, was Richard Hawthorne. Still in his pressed gray suit, the tie too tight around a throat that had never learned to speak the truth. What did you say? I asked. He stepped forward slowly, as if entering a boardroom. I found the files, he said. On your old laptop. After you left, you were gone, Morgan. It was just sitting there. Victor was smiling now, not at me, but at Richard. You weren't supposed to understand it, I said, breath shallow. You weren't even supposed to look. I didn't think it was important, Richard replied. Just old agency material, code and names that didn't make sense. I passed it to Derek. He thought it might help with a connection for his startup. My mouth went dry. You handed federal intelligence to a venture capitalist. He said it was encrypted. My father snapped, as if that made it better. He didn't even open it. He just forwarded it to a potential investor. Some legal firm, Aaron Holdings, I asked coldly. He blinked. Yes. How did you know? I almost screamed. Aaron Holdings was one of Victor's shell fronts. A laundering mechanism flagged years ago by Interpol, scrubbed from every record except the Phoenix Drive. I stepped back. Staggered. You didn't just compromise a mission, I said. You gave him the key to rebuild it. Richard looked genuinely confused. But you had already left the agency. You were out. Why hold on to that life? I wanted to laugh. Or cry. Or collapse. Instead, I said. Because it wasn't just a job, Dad. It was my integrity. My word. My life. I stared at him, at the man who taught me how to shake hands firmly but never once looked me in the eye when it counted. You handed my soul to a man like him, I whispered, so your son-in-law could pitch an app. Victor chuckled in the corner. Fathers and daughters. Always more complicated than war. And then it happened. A sound split the room, loud, sharp, fast. Gunfire. Eli dropped through the ceiling hatch like thunder incarnate, landing in a crouch. His weapon was already aimed, but he wasn't fast enough. Victor fired. The shot hit Eli in the shoulder, spinning him backwards. I screamed. The noise was instinctive, a fracture in my voice I hadn't let loose in years. Victor turned the gun toward me. I didn't hesitate. My boot came up fast, slicing the air. From the inside heel, the hidden blade I had sworn never to use again flicked loose into my hand. I lunged. The blade sliced across Victor's wrist. The gun clattered to the ground. Blood spattered the floor like punctuation. I grabbed Lila's arm, yanked the straps free. Run, I shouted. She didn't hesitate. Not for a second. That child, brave beyond her years, sprinted into the corridor like she was born for it. I turned back to Eli. He was trying to stand, blood pouring from his shoulder, face twisted in pain. I've got you, I said, looping his arm over my neck. We're getting out. No hero moves, he murmured. I almost smiled. Too late. We staggered through the corridor, footsteps pounding behind us. But Victor didn't follow. He never chased. He waited, planned, watched. And always left a message. We burst into open air. I slammed my wrist against the encrypted comm. Blackbird override. Code 91. X. Requesting aerial recon and medical evac. Static. Then a voice. Confirmed. Drones inbound. ETA, 90 seconds. Above us the sky buzzed the faint whirring sound of unmanned units cutting through clouds like judgment. I looked back once, just once. Victor stood in the doorway, hand bleeding, face unreadable. Behind him, spray-painted on the wall in garish red, Phoenix doesn't die. It waits. Claire was holding Lila when we returned. Sobbing. Clutching. Afraid to let go. Derek stood off to the side, pale and shaking. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. 2 federal agents flanked him. One clicked the cuffs around his wrists. You passed classified material to an unregistered foreign entity, one agent said. Derek tried to speak. Failed. I didn't watch, didn't need to. I walked toward the dining table, now empty, wine stains blooming across the cloth like old blood. I placed my old FBI badge on the center plate. Stepped back. No one said a word. Evelyn looked at me like she didn't know whether to pray or apologize. Richard didn't meet my eyes. Cowards rarely do. Later, when the house was finally quiet, Claire found me in the hallway. Her face was puffy, her mascara smeared. But her hands were steady as she said, "You saved her." "No," I replied, "she saved me." She reached into her coat pocket and handed me something small, a charm. Lila's. The one shaped like a feather. The one she said matched my necklace. Lila says you're the strongest woman she knows. I held the charm for a long time. Felt the metal warm against my palm. And for the first time in years, the scar I carried didn't feel like a curse. It felt like proof that I had survived, even when they tried to bury me. I rose anyway, like fire, like memory, like the phoenix. They erased the story. So I made the world witness it. The safe house was still there, tucked behind a bookstore in a part of town no one bothered with after dark. It hadn't changed. Same faded signage. Same cracked window. Same flickering hallway bulb that buzzed like an anxious breath. Inside, the air smelled like dust and disuse. But beneath the floorboard, locked beneath 4 inches of reinforced steel, lay something that hadn't forgotten me. The Spectre case. Its biometric scanner blinked once, then green as it recognized my fingerprint. Inside, the encrypted core, thermal keypads, and a collapsible console barely larger than a laptop but capable of launching classified content across 12 secure nodes simultaneously. A last resort weapon for agents declared either dead or disavowed. I activated it. The screen lit up with a quiet hum. Spectre protocol, ready. For a moment, I just stared. I could almost hear Ethan's voice. Truth is a loaded gun. Don't aim unless you're ready to fire. Well, I was ready. And this time I wasn't going to miss. I loaded the drive from the Phoenix locket. The raw files decrypted, slowly revealing everything: Victor's original identity, his faked death during the Cluj-Napoca transfer, the internal emails approving his cover-up, and the most damning, Derek's signature on a cross-border legal support agreement with Aaron Holdings, routing encrypted funds through Eastern Europe then back into U.S. investment channels. I cross-checked the metadata. The timestamps aligned. Every transaction connected. This wasn't speculation. This was proof. And proof in the right hands is revolution. I opened the broadcast module. Selected recipients: U.S. Department of Justice, Cybercrime Division, 4 major global news networks, internal FBI watchdog unit. And, because the universe deserved irony, my old handler at the bureau. I added one final line of code: override authorization, witness mode, public domain. Meaning the moment it launched, no agency could shut it down. No redaction, no edits. Just the truth. Raw and burning. I hit transmit. And watched the world ignite. Screens in cafes blinked. Boardrooms froze mid-meeting. News anchors interrupted their own reports. Across hundreds of terminals, Victor's voice began to play. From that room. That recording. Last time you chose the mission over the man. Let's see who you choose now. Then came the footage, Ethan's final words. My voice. The explosion. The aftermath. And finally the paper trail. Every name, every number, every account, every betrayal. By the time it ended, silence was no longer a weapon. It was a verdict. They arrested Derek before sunrise. FBI vans, unmarked sedans, flashlights slicing through the morning fog. He didn't struggle, didn't speak. Just stood there, face pale, watching neighbors record him with trembling hands. Claire didn't come outside. She just stood in the upstairs window, holding Lila, staring down as if trying to understand how her life became collateral. Inside the house, Evelyn paced in circles. Richard sat in his chair, unmoving, remote still in hand, like he could rewind the last 48 hours and find a version that hurt less. There wasn't one. Victor, he vanished again. Of course he did. But this time he left a note. Digitally embedded in the metadata of his last email to Derek, a line of code that translated to one phrase: truth isn't fatal. Exposure is. He knew what was coming. He didn't need to win, he just needed time, but now, so did I. The Bureau didn't call. Not directly. But the watchdog unit released a public statement. We thank the unnamed whistleblower who exposed structural failure and cross-border corruption tied to the Phoenix files. An internal inquiry is now active. Unnamed. Of course. They'd buried me once. They couldn't afford to unearth me completely, but I didn't need their thanks. I didn't need the badge. All I ever needed was the silence to stop being a weapon. That night, I sat on the roof of the old safe house, a cup of cold coffee in hand. Eli sat beside me, arm in a sling. We didn't say much, didn't need to. Finally, he broke the quiet. You really did it. I nodded. They'll come after you, he added. Maybe, I said. But not tonight. He looked over. What changed? I didn't answer at first. Instead, I reached for the locket, now empty, and held it up to the moonlight. The Phoenix engraving shimmered in silver. It's not about survival anymore, I said. It's about light. Truth doesn't need a gun. It doesn't need vengeance. It doesn't even need justice. It just needs to be seen. Because when the world is finally watching, even the darkest secrets lose their power. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do is speak. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing to move forward without dragging the weight. The house felt smaller now. Like the lies had taken up too much space, and once they were gone, nothing was left to hold the walls apart. Claire didn't come out of her room for 2 days. I knew because I sat outside with Lila during both of them, coloring in silence, answering her questions gently when she asked if bad people always looked normal. They look like everyone else, I told her. That's why the truth matters. She nodded. Then handed me a drawing. It was a bird. Wings spread wide, made of fire. Derek was gone. Officially charged, unofficially erased. The Bureau was keeping it quiet, of course. No headlines, no press. But the firm folded overnight and the investors vanished like shadows at sunrise. Victor's broadcast lived on across 1,000 forums archived by people who knew too well how the system buries inconvenient stories. And me. I returned to my apartment, the same peeling paint, the same coffee maker that groaned every morning, the same folded blanket on the couch from nights I couldn't make it to bed. It didn't feel like home. But it didn't feel like exile anymore. That was something. 3 days later, someone knocked on my door. Not a text. Not a call. A knock. I opened it to find my mother standing there, her Sunday coat buttoned to the collar, eyes red, mascara washed clean. In her hands, a small wooden box. Familiar. Worn. I didn't say anything. Neither did she. For a moment. Then softly she said, "This was yours." She held it out. My first FBI badge. The one from graduation. I hadn't seen it in over a decade. I didn't understand, she said, voice fragile, fingers trembling. I didn't want to believe my daughter was gone. I swallowed hard. I wasn't gone, Mom. I was just invisible. I kept it, she whispered. In the drawer with the Christmas cards. I read your letter, the one from the field. I didn't show anyone. I didn't know how. I opened the box. The badge was dulled edges, scratched numbers, slightly faded. But the inscription was still there. Serve with honor. She reached out, touched my hand. I don't know if I'll ever understand everything she said. I don't need you to, I replied gently. I just need you to believe me. She nodded. And that was enough. Later that night, I sat on the floor of my apartment, the badge in one hand, Lila's phoenix drawing in the other. They didn't match. One was issued by a government that once erased me. The other was given freely by a child who saw me. But both were real. And both were mine. Claire sent a message 2 days later. No apology. Just I don't know how to start fixing things, but I want to try. For Lila. I didn't reply right away. Some wounds don't close cleanly. But I did answer. Eventually. Then start with her. She deserves better than what we had. Because truth is, I didn't hate Claire. I hated the silence between us. The expectation that I would remain small so she could feel big. But I wasn't small anymore. And I didn't need her approval to be full. Richard never reached out. Not a call. Not a word. But a week after the broadcast, a brown envelope arrived at my door. Inside a photograph, me in my academy blues shaking hands with the director. The smile on my face real unbroken. Taped to the back in his handwriting I was proud. I just didn't know how to say it. That didn't heal the wound. But it stopped the bleeding. The truth is I didn't get justice. Not in the way the world defines it. Victor was still out there, my career was still gone. The past could never be rewritten. But that wasn't the point anymore. Justice wasn't always handcuffs or headlines. Sometimes it was just this. A badge. A bird. A knock at the door. The choice to keep walking. Not because you've forgotten what happened, but because you've finally decided it won't define you. I placed the badge in the drawer, closed it gently. Not to hide it, but to let it rest. Because I wasn't returning to that world. And I wasn't hiding from it either. I was moving forward. With scars, and with silence. The kind they couldn't weaponize anymore. Because I had finally made it my own. I wasn't the ghost they buried, I was the lighthouse they didn't expect to rise. The morning light poured through the apartment windows like a quiet truth. No sirens. No encrypted messages, no gunmetal scent clinging to my clothes. Just stillness. I hadn't worn the blazer in weeks. The one I used to button up like armor. It now hung quietly on the back of my closet door, soft with dust. I'd taken to walking barefoot, brewing coffee with both hands and staring out the window longer than necessary. Healing, I think, is what they call it. But healing isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the sound of a woman learning to exist again without being ready to run. I stood in front of the mirror that day, toothbrush in hand, staring at the reflection that didn't flinch anymore. There she was. The woman who had been a daughter, a ghost, a weapon, a whisper. Now she just looked. Human. Hair tied back, eyes steady. Mouth not tight with secrets. I raised my hand and touched the pendant at my neck, the locket now empty, lighter than before. I hadn't removed it. Not because of what it held, but because of what it reminded me. You can survive the fire. And still be the one who lights the way. The knock came just after noon. Not sharp, not urgent. Intentional. I opened the door to find a woman in a gray tailored coat and practical shoes. Her face was calm, her eyes kind. She extended a business card. Department of Human Rights, Private Collaboration Division. "We followed your story," she said. Quietly. I didn't invite her in, but I didn't close the door either. "We're not looking for agents," she continued. "We're looking for people who understand what silence costs." My brows lifted. And what would I be doing? Not espionage, she smiled. Advocacy. Whistleblower protection. Testimony support. We help people who've been buried climb out. You've been there. You know what it feels like. I looked at the card again. It wasn't fancy, no logos. No seals. Just names. And beneath them, truth deserves a voice. We sat at my kitchen table, her sipping tea, me thumbing the edges of the card like it might change form. "You don't have to say yes," she said. "You don't even have to say anything today. But I wanted you to know. You've already changed things." I looked up. How? That broadcast. That message. You told the world the truth without asking permission. Most people wait their entire lives for someone to validate them. You didn't. That wasn't courage, I murmured. That was survival. Maybe. But to someone else it looked like freedom. I let that sit, because maybe both were true. After she left, I didn't move for a long time. Just stood at the window watching light ripple across glass and let myself feel something I hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not anger, not grief. Clarity. I walked back to the mirror not out of habit but because I wanted to. Wanted to see the woman I had become. The one who had made hard choices, who had lost people, who had buried pieces of herself to keep others safe, but who never lost the core, who never stopped believing in the truth even when it nearly killed her. I reached for the photo on the shelf. Me and Ethan. It was taken during a downtime mission in Rabat. He was laughing. I was pretending not to smile. You always knew I'd come back, I whispered. The silence in the room wasn't heavy anymore. It was full. I placed the photo beside the card. 2 reminders. One of who I'd lost, one of who I could still become. That evening, I took a walk. Not to clear my head. Just to feel my feet on the ground. The city pulsed around me, children chasing dogs, a man playing jazz on a corner, a woman humming as she closed her flower stand. No one knew me here. And for the first time I didn't mind. Because I wasn't hiding, I wasn't blending. I was just present. Alive. A woman among women. A survivor among strangers. A voice among millions. But one that would be heard, not through weapons, not through fear, but through what the world had tried to erase and failed. When I returned home, I sat at my desk and opened my notebook. The pages were mostly blank. But that didn't scare me anymore. I picked up a pen and wrote my name as Morgan. I was an agent. I was erased. But I am still here. And I will speak for those who can't. Because silence doesn't protect the wounded. It only hides the war. I closed the notebook. Exhaled. And in that breath I understood I hadn't just survived the fire. I had become its keeper. Some stories aren't meant to be silenced. They're meant to survive you. The recorder blinked red on the desk waiting. I sat in front of it, elbows on the wood, the same worn surface where I'd once kept blueprints and decrypted codes. Now it held something far more dangerous. My voice. My truth. I stared at the blinking light for a long moment. The silence in the room wasn't empty, it pulsed, with memory, with grief, with choice. Then I pressed record, and began. If this message reaches you, it means I've gone off-grid. Don't worry, that's not always a bad thing. But just in case I don't come back, I wanted something to remain. My name is Morgan Hawthorne. I served as an agent for 12 years. I kept secrets. I protected lives. And then I was buried not with a gravestone, but with paperwork, protocol, and silence. I was erased. But not lost. And now I choose to be remembered, not for medals or missions, but for surviving what they said I wouldn't. I don't need justice. I just need my story to be heard. Because maybe, just maybe, someone out there is waiting for permission to speak. And I'm here to say you don't need it. Tell your story. Even if your voice shakes. Even if no one believes you yet. Especially then. If I don't return, let this be my last act. Not a fight, not a mission, just a truth. Unedited. Undeniable. Alive. I ended the recording. Saved it. Backed it up to 3 secure drives. Then uploaded one to the Department of Human Rights Whistleblower Archive. Not for fame, not even for closure. But because I owed it to the girl, I used to be the one who sat alone on a rooftop in Istanbul clutching Ethan's encrypted drive, thinking no one would ever understand why she ran. Now, they would. Now. She was no longer alone. Morning crept into the apartment like a whispered secret. Golden light spilled across the hardwood floors, soft and forgiving. The kind of light that didn't demand anything, it just was. I stood barefoot, coffee in hand, letting the sun warm the places even fire couldn't reach. On the windowsill sat the locket open. The microdrive was gone, replaced by something simpler, a feather charm from Lila. She had pressed it into my hand 2 nights ago and whispered, "For luck. And because you're not scary anymore." I laughed then. Not because it hurt, because it didn't. Not anymore. I sat cross-legged on the floor, light pouring across my face. I picked up the locket, thumb brushing, the etched phoenix wings outstretched rising from ash. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I just remembered. All of it. The silence, the betrayals, the moments I thought I would never be whole again. And then I whispered, not to the world, not to a room full of ghosts, but to myself, I am not the agent they buried. I am the story they couldn't kill. Because sometimes redemption doesn't arrive with sirens. It arrives with breath, with stillness, with the decision to stop bleeding for a world that never knew your name and start living for the one person who always deserved your truth. They tried to make me small. They tried to write my name in pencil so it could be erased. But I carved it into memory. And now, wherever I go, whatever I become, I carry the one thing they never expected. Not vengeance. Not proof. Light. So, to the woman reading this, or hearing my voice, or walking through a silence of your own, let me say it clearly: you are not too much. You are not broken beyond repair. You are not what they said about you. You are the fire they thought would die. And you are still burning. Not to destroy, but to guide. And to the girl I used to be who flinched at her own reflection and apologized for breathing, I see you. I remember you. And I've come back for you. We're going to live now. Fully, fiercely, freely. Because in the end, some stories aren't meant to stay buried. Some scars don't need to be hidden. And some silences, they don't break. They rise. Like smoke. Like truth. Like a phoenix.